Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? My name is SueJean, and I'm the Senior Events Manager here with the CMX and Bevy team. And welcome to today's Masterclass. We are so excited to have Gina, and I'll be introducing her very shortly. We're very, very excited to have her to walk us through managing conflict with online communities. So we have the next hour together, and we're going to hear from Gina, and then we'll close our time with a Q&A. And I also just want to take a moment that we are excited to have CMX Summit take place this October 4th to 5th in Redwood City, California. We have opened up early registration, and we just announced our first phase of speakers. So I'll put the link in our chat shortly, so please check that out for more details. So with that said, I am so happy to introduce today's guest, Gina Graziani. Gina, go ahead and show yourself here. We are so excited to have you. And Gina has been a part of the community industry for more than a decade now, and is currently the Director of Membership Programs and Community at Zumba Fitness. And we also had the pleasure of hearing from her at last year's summit, and are so glad to have her back. So Gina, thanks so much for joining us, and happy to pass it to you.
Thank you, SueJean. Thank you for having me, and hello to all my fellow community builders. I'm so glad we can spend a little time together today. If I haven't had the pleasure of connecting with you yet, my name is Gina Graziani. I'm the Director of Membership Programs and Community at Zumba Fitness. I'm coming to you from North Carolina today. I'm between North Carolina and South Florida. I have another friend here from South Florida in the chat. I'm going to be looking at the chat on and off throughout. And as SueJean mentioned, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A, and we're going to make sure that we get to them and cover them at the end. So let's jump into it. Managing conflict in digital communities. Why was this content needed in the first place? So really a couple of reasons. We found that leaders within our community were navigating a lot of challenges, and we wanted to give them resources to help de-escalate so their communities could remain focused on the goals that they had in place. We also wanted to provide support for them to understand how to protect their time, and having tools to lean into and use really helped save time for them in doing some of this work. And then really also as a support for their mental wellness, because this is work. There's a lot of labor and time that goes into managing conflict in the digital community. So we wanted to give them tools to help support, of course, their mental wellness, which is all of us. When we gather as community buildings, I also want to say this, because there are a couple of us here today. When we gather, we're often focused on different goals, or we're at different stages in our professional journeys. So no matter where you're at or what you're working on, thank you for joining this today. And I hope that you find some meaningful and useful information that you can take away and use with your own community. So if nothing else, just to recognize this part of the work that you and your teams do. There's power in that, just taking a step back and breathing and saying, wow, this is really something that we've been focusing on maybe for many years, and it's nice just to take a beat and look at what we're doing a little more closely. So I'm going to start to share my screen, and we'll get right into the content. So let me see here. All right. And we're off, you guys. So what I really hope that you're able to walk away from today is I want you to have a couple of things. Number one, I want for everyone to have a 5-step plan. You can adapt it to meet your own needs. A 5-step plan on how to manage conflict in digital communities. Also, some strategies for identifying different types of trending conflict that you or your team may see in your communities. And then just some ways to learn how to design practice exercises when you're coaching your team members on how to navigate conflict. So let's do it, guys. On the agenda today, we're going to move through information about the power and purpose of digital spaces, platforms, purpose, expectation setting with your leaders. Then we'll talk about creating a plan and the 5 steps. We have it broken down into 5 steps. Again, you can totally adapt this to what your needs might be. And then we'll talk about practice exercises. So identifying topics, creating exercises, which is really fun, and then best practices for how you coach people on how to respond in a time of conflict. And then we'll share some final thoughts, just some tips for all of us to keep in mind, for your teams to keep in mind. So I'm kind of positioning this as it's a refresher for us if we're actively doing this work in community spaces, but also if you work with ambassador teams, if you're working with people on developing their own communities and building teams, we're going to kind of look at it from that angle, like how we can share this information with others that are going to be doing this work as well. Okay, so that's the agenda. And now let's jump into the power and purpose of digital communities, which I know that everyone here is well versed in already. So the reason that I have it framed like this is because when we were presenting this information to our community members, we wanted just to either remind them or educate them about what are digital communities, if they've never heard that phrasing before. Facebook, WhatsApp groups, Cow Talk, all different kinds of platforms, right? What is the power of them? What is the purpose of them? And so we just shared some general information. I'm going to share some highlights of that with you now. So one of the things that we wanted to start with was about community from Coretta Scott King. The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassion of its members. That word compassion is so important and that we use it often. And I tell you, the reason why having a framework to use for managing conflict is because our compassion can vary with, it can be impacted by whatever else we have going on during the day. So if I am facing a crisis or a challenge in my life, like the amount of attention and compassion I might have in this moment might differ greatly day to day. So having a framework to use really helps. Digital communities, this is what we shared with them. They bring people together around a common purpose. We know this. And then for them from a business perspective, they're going to be able to use it to promote their community building events, able to gain key insights on needs and feedback, strengthen existing relationships, and build on new relationships as well. Okay. All right. So those are some of the general things that we share with them, just kind of bring that focus into like, why are we doing this in the first place? Why do we have this digital space that we use? And for many people, often they were, especially over the past 3 years, they were taking an in real life community that they had built or were a part of, and they were pulling it into a digital space to have continued contact and relationship, and also monetize some of the things that they were doing. So it was really important for us to get that focus on this is what they're for, and this is what they can be used for. This is the power of them. Then we would talk to them a little bit about the CMX's community engagement cycle. They identify as a part of your community. You gain trust, which is an ongoing process. It doesn't happen once. It takes a lot to build and just a split second to lose. All the different ways that community members can participate with you, and then the reward for doing that. So we talked to them about the community engagement cycle. So these are some of the ways that we just kind of talk to them about the power and purpose of what a digital community is. And then we make it really clear. We set that expectation that it's not if, but when. Conflicts are inevitable in every community, but there are steps that we can take to help strengthen the bond. Oftentimes, if a digital community goes through an interesting conflict together, the way that it's navigated, it becomes part of the fabric of your community and it becomes part of your history. I mean, I've seen things like way back in the day on forums that people would actually make t-shirts and bracelets for and show up at, in real life events wearing the stuff as an extension of an experience we had in that community together online in the forum. So if you navigate it correctly and show up as the leader that you hope to be on your best day, it can become an interesting part of your community's history. So because it's inevitable, no better time than the present to get prepared. So creating a plan is going to help you get to that resolution as quickly as possible and move on to the community. So even though conflict is inevitable, crisis doesn't have to be. And I'm not sure how many of you, and I would love to see in the chat, how many of you have been involved in a crisis level conflict in your digital community and had to navigate that with your team or yourself? It's a lot. Lily says I have, Jay has. Yeah, it takes a toll. It's always fascinating to hear how different organizations and different leaders navigate those. Frequently, games industry is amazing, I have to say. I love hearing the stories and all of the different strategies in place in the gaming communities, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So we've been through it, guys. Let's talk about creating a plan then. And I'm sure that you guys have processes in place. Maybe they're similar, maybe they're not. Again, what we talk about is going to be totally adaptable. So let's talk about the 5 steps that we have here today. So you guys know when you have a plan, a framework, right? It allows us to be responsive rather than reactive. Remember, we talked about compassion a few minutes ago. It really, what the attention and the grace that you're able to bring to a situation in a time of conflict is really impacted by what you're experiencing as a human being on any particular day. So these are the 5 steps. I'm going to break them down for you and kind of give you insight into them. Step number 1 is assess the situation. Okay. Now you'll see that step number 2 is do your research. They sound similar, but they're different. So step number 1, assess the situation. You're working, or maybe you've just taken your dog, you've just woken up, or you're coming back from doing some enjoyable activity. You look at your phone, you look at your tablet, you look at your laptop. It's happening. You're getting a million messages. You're being tagged like crazy. You have DMs, emails, maybe you have some texts. You are in the middle of some type of conflict in your digital community. So what do? You need to assess the situation. Where is the conversation taking place? It could be across multiple platforms. If you're a person that engages in digital communities in a WhatsApp, several WhatsApp group chats that you have Facebook groups, maybe you have a Facebook page, you have an Instagram. Where is the conversation taking place? Is it taking place across multiple platforms? Okay. Now, what is the conversation about? What does the conflict seem to be? What's at the heart of it? Is it that is it that your event registration website is down? Is it that someone was harmed in your digital community by another community member? What is happening? Now that you understand what the discussion is about and the space or spaces where it's taken place, we move to step 2, and that is do your research. Look at the people who are involved in the conversation, who are expressing the most frustration or need. Is it one person? Is it several? And the research that you want to do is you want to understand who the people are who are having a conversation. Is it someone that you've had other interactions with? This is important to note because if you understand maybe even where they reside physically, has there been a natural disaster or an economical crisis there? Could that be impacting how they're engaging with you? Is this a person who it's just their MO to type in all caps with exclamation points? So there's no need to be alarmed at the way that they're communicating. The urgency isn't what it seems to be because that's just the way they communicate overall. Do you have insight into other situations with them that you've navigated? You want to understand as much of that as you can because that's really going to impact the way that you communicate with them and how you lead. And looking, a lot of conversation amongst each other. All right, guys. So then we move into step 3. You understand where the conversation is taking place. You understand who the people are that are involved and what your familiarity with them is, your past history, the way that you've communicated. And then step 3 is my favorite step. You have to create mental space. So this is a time for you to take a step back because conflicts can feel and can actually be very urgent with people tagging, in the comments. You can feel this rush to jump into the discussion and manage it, defend your position, explain, agree or disagree. But sometimes the nature of a conflict is truly urgent. An example of that would be anything that's to a person. For urgent needs, you're going to post a brief acknowledgement that you're aware of the issue and that you're going to update them as soon as possible. But you need to create that mental space so that you can show up and be the leader that you hope to be on your best day, right? Really take a step back and understand how you want to lead this, because you're setting the tone for what is appropriate and acceptable in your community, right? And other people are looking to you as a leader, or looking to your team members as leaders to navigate this, and just, watching what happens. Step 4 is choose your platform. So if you have several different spaces where conversation about this conflict is taking place, you guys, I'm sure, are aware, use the platform where you're going to have the most reach and engagement. So if you have a Facebook group that has, 5,000 people in it, but your WhatsApp groups are most active and engaged, that's where people are really talking, and they're the most engaged and there's the most activity. Maybe you start in the WhatsApp group and you want to post your main messaging in that most engaged channel, so that the people that are receiving that content and consuming it can then start amplifying it in the other spaces as well. So choose your platform. It's also important to think about platform. If it's 1 or 2 people involved in the conflict, or if it's something very sensitive in nature, even if they're putting you or someone else on blast, even if they're not showing kindness and grace, if it's something related to payment issues or a personal issue, we probably want to coach leaders to take that conversation, perhaps an email, a DM, a text message. Phone calls are great and video calls are great, but you always want to have a written record of what was discussed, just so you have that. So choose your platform carefully. And then really important is to write and review. So oftentimes I'll find myself writing with like a hands on hips kind of stance because maybe I'm not feeling very compassionate and full of grace that day when I'm responding to something. So I'll often write something, and this is important as well. Sometimes I'm too close to the information. So I might have technical details or a deep understanding of a product or an event or a situation. And so when I'm speaking to someone about it, perhaps they're not privy to, they don't have all of that information as well. And so it seems like I'm leaving gaps of information out. So oftentimes I will write what my response should be to manage the conflict. And then I'll share that I trust, that I can go to, and that will give me an honest, feedback about what I've written. I see what you've written here, but I'm not sure what this means. I don't understand this. Can you explain this to me more in depth? And so that always helps. It also helps to have someone read it, and they can try to, you can see what their reaction is, because it's very hard to infer tone in text unless you're using all caps and using exclamation points. So it helps to have someone read through and see what kind of feeling it evokes in them. So you can predict, what the impact is going to be. All right, let me scroll through and see. I'm seeing a lot of connections being made. All right, so those are the 5 steps. Assess the situation, do your research, create mental space, choose your platform where you're going to respond, and then write and review. Pretty simple, right? All right, so let's talk about how to identify. We're going to get into the practice exercises. This is my favorite part. And when we took our community leaders through this process, this was the most exciting and the most engaged part of the whole process. So I want to talk about how to identify those trending conflicts within your community. And you guys know, because you're in your communities every day, your teams are in there every day, we know that there are a couple of different categories of conflict, right? One could be ongoing subjective debate. So let's use Zumba as an example of that. Every month, instructors for Zumba Fitness receive music and choreo. Very subjective. What one person loves, another person is going to detest. So it's ongoing. Every single month, you're going to see positive feedback and negative feedback about the same content. This could be music, the people that are featured in the videos, the educators, clothing that's been released. It's super, super subjective. And these are just conversations that are being held all the time within the community. The next one that I have here is seasonal community issues. So I would think of these things more based around annual events. Zumba has several different events throughout the year, academies, home office connections, and then our largest educational event is called ZenCon. And it's held in Orlando every year. And so every year around the time of registration for ZenCon, we see the same questions. We see the same concerns. So that's seasonal, right? And then community initiatives. There's a contest that's held every year, or an opportunity for you to work with content creators and that you open up to your community for discussion. Ideation initiatives. We see common questions and conflict around those seasonal things that we do as a community every year. And then the next thing is trending local and world topics. So in the US, if there's a national election cycle, if there's been a natural disaster in part of the world, if there's a humanitarian crisis, you're going to see members of your community debating these things and having conversations about these things, which can evolve into conflict in between members. So these are some of the examples. I would love if you guys would share here in the chat, maybe some of the things that you've seen, if they fall into one of these three categories, or kind of common conflicts that you see your members having. World issues for sure. Thank you, Brittany. Strikes on the day of an event. Wow. Chris, I'm assuming you're saying three, like maybe trending in local. Subjective debates, change in offerings, problems with software and missing features, bugs for sure. Ongoing subjective debate for product features. Always fascinating. And then having to explain, we have to work on what impacts the majority of the community members or the users. Holidays, not others. Content debates, creator space. Yes, working with brands or other CCs. Smart energy meters, benefits, and the opposite, anti-smart meters. Very good. These are really interesting, guys. I'm going to read a couple more different opinions on the state of current game. One person loves, another detests. The truth, content debates, language barriers, global community, but engagement is all in English. That is such a challenge. That is such a challenge for sure. All right, these are really good examples. You guys are pros at identifying trending conflicts. Always fascinating to hear. So then what we did is we took, and again, this was the most engaging part of the experience for our members. We took them through a series of practice exercises. I want to take 2 steps back for a second. When we were talking about that 5-step plan, another tool that we gave to our community members was we gave them a visual tool. It was a conflict gauge. Very simple to create. We just used a block, and then we had it divided into color sections. Dark green at the beginning, moving all the way up through light green, yellow, orange, and red. And dark green, we classified as normal everyday conversation that you see in your digital space. And then we moved on through, light green, yellow, orange, and red being ultimate crisis level. The reason that we wanted to provide them with this visual tool is because we wanted to explain to them that at these different levels of conflict, you may need to bring other levels of support in. So what would you categorize as normal conversation, low chatter, moderate conflict, high conflict, and crisis level? At a crisis level, if these are leaders that are managing social spaces, digital communities on behalf of the Zumba home office, which we have 49 groups that manage 49 Facebook groups for us for one of these programs, there comes a point when on that crisis gauge, if you're at yellow, orange, or red, that is the time to contact your support person at the Zumba home office so that they can weigh in and give you support for managing. You need to make them aware of what the conflict is, etc. So sometimes even just having that visual tool helps them communicate internally, and then also to another person, another member of their volunteer team if they needed to. Guys, we're at green, we're good. I think we're at level yellow. Okay, this is for sure level orange or red. We need to contact the home office. It's just an easy way to communicate that keeps it simple. So that's something that you may want to think about creating, to use just a simple conflict gauge, a visual tool. So these practice exercises, I wanted to talk with you about how we created them. So we took them through a series of 3. We would give them 3 different scenarios, and we would kind of lay it out, tell the story to them, and then we would show an example of what was actually written in the digital community. And then what we would do is we would give 2 potential responses that a person might give when they were managing that conflict. Really interesting. We base these off of content-based. The next practice exercise was event-based, if they were an event host, and then personal beliefs. So the third scenario that we gave them was based on holding an event or making a donation to a charitable organization that one of their digital community members had an issue with, felt that that was not in alignment with their personal beliefs. So we use those 3 types of scenarios often when we trained our teams in these practices. So this is scenario number 1. This is one that we used, and this is just an example of a student. Let's say you live in Arizona. There are tons of Zumba Facebook groups for like the Zumba community, not just instructors, but people that take classes and people who teach classes, everybody. And you attended a class and you weren't really pleased with some of the music that you heard. It was a little sexualized, a little inappropriate. And so this is just an example of someone who goes to a lot of classes, is a Zumba super fan, very active in the community, and they've gone to a class, had a negative experience in their opinion, and so they are going to share that that on their social media spaces where they could connect with other community members. So they have it here. An influential student took a class with an instructor that they've never taken a class with before. The student was offended by lyrics of a song used during the class. They provided feedback in their after-class survey, and they also chose to share their experience online to warn others that this instructor uses inappropriate songs in their class playlists. They posted their thoughts in 3 different Zumba community Facebook groups. And after 2 hours, at least 20 fellow students have expressed concern because they've registered or they're considering registering for a class with this instructor. The instructor is being tagged multiple times, and they're now starting to receive requests to cancel registrations for their upcoming classes. So if you're an instructor that's been in this position, your business is being damaged, and it can be extremely frustrating. So what you're able to do, and I know that you guys know this as community builders, so I'm just breaking it down for how we relay this information to people who are novice, or they're just getting into leading community spaces, or perhaps they've been doing it for a long time, but they are in the weeds. So we're trying to give them an airplay view. Take a step back. This is emotional work that you're doing, intellectual and emotional work. We want to make sure you feel supported and you have the best tools in place. So activate that 5-step plan. Step number 1, assess the situation. Who is talking about what and where are they talking about it? Okay, it's a couple of large Facebook groups for our Zumba community. Who is this talking? Do I know them? Yes, I do. It's somebody that has had other interactions like this with other instructors. I've seen them post similar things like this before. So they've assessed the situation. They're doing their research on who the person is, what class they may have attended. Have they had interactions with them before? And then they're going to do that step 3, my favorite step, create mental space. Take a step back so that you're not jumping in to start typing right away, which can feel so satisfying to do. But are you showing up as the best? React is really going to depend on how much mental, what you have to give on that day. If you have a child that is at home sick, if you're caring for a loved one that is ill, if you have a new job and a new project that you're working on, all of these things can impact the level of attention that you're able to. And what you write and how you manage in time of conflict can either create more conflict or you can de-escalate it really quickly. So taking a step back and creating that mental space, taking your hands off your hips, breathing, it gives you the space that you need to show up in the best way that you possibly can. Okay. So just take a second to read through this. Yeah. I am going to move into what was written. You guys may be able to see. I'm going to read it. If not, hello, Zumba friends. I try to keep my post positive because there's already so much negativity on social media. This post isn't really meant to be negative, just honest feedback from a paying student that loves their Zumba classes. I recently attended a class with a local instructor that's new to me named Jane Doe. I've heard such great things about this instructor, and I was excited to give it a try. And then I heard a very inappropriate song they chose during the class. song was super inappropriate for a class setting. The lyrics were super sexual and had lots of profanities. We paid for the experience. I did put this feedback in the instructor's after class survey, but I wanted to share it here too, in case others are going to take a class with this instructor. Zumba fans, we see you. So the next thing that we did was we took people through a series of different examples for a response. And when we did this, we also educated them on a couple of best practices to keep in mind. We talked to leaders about empathy. We talked to leaders about tone and how you can really set the tone for what your response is going to be in conflict within the first 3 sentences of what you write. We talked to them about clarity, and this is really important. You need to be clear and concise in your responses when you're managing conflict. Say what you mean and really set the boundary. Be clear about who you are, okay? But also be open and receptive to other points of view. And understand that when you manage a digital community, and you guys know this, some people are there with the popcorn. They're there for that experience. Conflicts are fun. They enjoy watching and consuming. And so there may not be a simple, resolution to some. Spectator sport for sure, Jay. Yes. So you have all different types of personalities there. And that's why it's important to do your research and just understand who your community members are. We talked to them about the power of using likes and reactions on different platforms where those tools, those functionalities are available, and how powerful they can be. And we also, we talked to them about knowing when to conclude, because when you're moving through a conflict, there will come a time when you need to conclude the discussion and move on as a community. So we talked to them about that. So we talked through best practices. But here, after we go through the scenario and show them what the person has written, we then go through examples of responses. And it's interesting to see their response to the 2 different types of responses. So the response number 1 to this person who posted about their negative experience with the song in class. Hi, Sally. I don't understand why you chose to post this here. I appreciate you including this feedback. You could have reached out to me directly. It's disappointing that you chose to criticize me on social media. Not all music and classes are for everyone. Thanks for showing us who you are. Ooh, I bet that would feel good to write in certain situations for sure. And really what we tell people is there's no right or wrong response in these examples that we're showing you. It's about the impact that you're hoping to make and the resolution you're hoping to get to in this conflict in your community. Second response is, hi, Sally. Thank you for joining us for the class. It was great to meet you. Thank you for sharing your feedback here and in the survey. I will consider it for sure, and I hope that you enjoyed the rest of the class. Sometimes instructors will use a song that they really enjoy and find motivating. While it's challenging to please every student with the whole playlist, we definitely want you to be satisfied and excited with the music, routines, and the class experience overall. Thank you again, and please feel free to DM me if you have any questions. So personally, I would hope to be able to show up as example number 2, but I definitely have felt like example number 1 plenty of times. So even just having these transparent and candid conversations about these different types of scenarios with the leaders in your communities, the people who are managing these digital spaces, it really just helps to give them a sense of belonging, recognition, understanding that it is challenging and frustrating, and it helps to be in communion and fellowship with other people who are experiencing the same kind of challenge. It feels good to belong and know that it's not just you that experience these types of frustrations. So we take them through these potential responses. We give them time to talk through why they might lean into one example type more than the other for a response, similar situations that they've navigated, and also ideas on how to make it more concise, less wordy, how to make it more positive. And also, if it were to escalate, how would you resolve that? So we take them through these exercises, and we find this part to be the most beneficial. It's real life examples, and it gives them time to kind of dig into, what would I do in a situation like this? What have I done? What could I do better? Okay. All right, guys. So final thoughts. Just want to share with you some tips to keep in mind. We encourage our leaders to take care of themselves, right? And this is really hard to do and important to do. Unlike an in-person argument, we never leave the room because we're connected all the time. So it's not sustainable or productive to be on all the time. So you need to set healthy boundaries, and your boundaries might change on a daily basis. The capacity that you have to give to a digital community to serve it might look very different today than it's going to look on Saturday. So maintain boundaries, adjust them every day or as often as you need to. Take care of yourself first. Know when to communicate and when to listen. So you need to strike a balance of communicating to resolve, to lead, and to add value, with stepping back to observe, because observation provides great insights. And when you step back, you can empower your other community members. Online debate can be healthy, but we need to know when enough is enough and when to tap out. The goal should always include forming a deeper level of understanding. The goal should never be to annihilate the other person, even though that can feel really good. If you are managing conflict and leading a digital community, you set the tone for what is appropriate and acceptable behavior in that space. And so we just encourage people to give people grace. Be clear about who you are. Stand to your ground. We're not asking people to make concessions about who they are. This is their space that they're leading, but we want to encourage them to be as inclusive as possible, be open to other people's perception, while at the same time being clear about who they are and what is appropriate in this space. The next one is the screenshots are forever. So whether you communicate via DMs or, in WhatsApp chats, messaging apps, social platforms, things are often screenshotted and distributed, and most of the time not in totality. So they're going to be missing pieces of information. So we always encourage our leaders to write in such a way that it alleviates any possibility of misperception of what they're trying to communicate when they're resolving the conflict. And then never say never. When you're managing a conflict, we should avoid terms like never, always, definitely, impossible, because mistakes happen and things change. So you need to keep this in mind to allow for possible changes. An example that I give of this is that we had an event coming up one year. I think it might have been in Manchester. And there was someone messaging me, I think it was during the time, towards the end of the pandemic, they were saying, is this still on? Is this going to still happen? And I knew there was a possibility that things could change and the date could change, but they messaged me and I was in the middle of 2 projects and had a meeting starting in 10 minutes. It's like, yes, I'm so excited to see you there. 3 days later, we changed the date of the event. Now, in that community engagement cycle, part of my community, I had earned their trust. I broke their trust. Gina works at the home office and she didn't even know the date was going to change. I did. I just had not been thoughtful. I had not created mental space and took a step back. I was rushing based on my set of circumstances that day. And I was not thoughtful in my response to that person. So by saying, yes, of course, definitely, I'll see you there. Avoid absolutes. I normally try to say, not to be ambivalent or apathetic, but I usually say things like, yes, as of now, I will definitely know if it changes in the future. So things like that to keep in mind. So those are just some tips to keep in mind for your leaders. And that is, I think that we had questions come in, but maybe we did, SueJean, let me know. And I love the gaming conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Gina. That was super insightful. I myself was learning a lot. And we do have a few questions. I want to encourage everyone to ask a question or even present a specific situation or conflict you encountered, minus the specific details, no names needed, but feel free to put in an example and a question in there. And you can also upvote the questions. So that would help us answer them in order based on the number of likes there. But I'm going to ask our first question here. And we have, the question says, talking regarding choosing a platform for responding to the conflict. So does that mean that we have to choose a different platform to respond to the conflict, or should we stick to the same platform? What is your advice on that?
I think for me, like if you're using several different spaces, let's say we use Higher Logic Vanilla as one of our forums right now. So there's a conversation going on there. Though there's not a lot of traffic, not a lot of eyes on that category in the forum. We also have an Instagram account, we have a TikTok, we have some WhatsApp chat. So I want to, if this is a conflict that's being discussed across multiple channels, I want to go to the channel that's going to have the most reach and impact immediately, especially based on the level of crisis. If it's orange, red level crisis, it's very important. It's affecting, let's say we've released an update to one of our apps and it's made it impossible for you it closes as soon as you open the app. It just crashes. I want to go to the spot where the majority of our instructors are going to see the information first without me having to drive them to another location. So I think it's relative to whatever the conflict is. If it's something like maybe your community is going to be implementing an upcharge for a product that you provide, and there's going to be a lot of negative conversation, maybe you want to drive that to behind a login. So if it's on a social platform, like a meta platform like Facebook or Instagram, it's not something where everyone can see. It's behind a login that users have to pay to see and jump in on that conversation. So I think it's based on your conflict, but generally if it's a conflict that people are talking about across multiple channels, I would recommend going to the place that's going to get the most action and impact, and you're going to be, most eyes will see it.
So depending on the conflict, maybe you want more visibility, and depending on others, maybe you don't want so much visibility.
I think so, right? Yeah.
Okay. Great. Our next question is, how do you end a discussion from community members who just won't let it go?
That's a great question. And I don't think there's a simple answer to it, because people are always going to want to continue for a couple of different reasons. Their motivation might be that this is fun. Someone from like the leadership role or a leader in the community is talking to me, and finally I have the floor and I'm going to keep sharing what I want to share about. I've been in situations unrelated to Zumba where I've been a part of communities for things that I enjoy, different hobbies, and people it's like an evening activity for them. They settle down, they have a little glass of a beverage, and they're ready to jump in and be a keyboard warrior. I think in each situation, what will happen when you do taper off the conversation? When I was sharing that we encourage our community members to use some of those functionalities like likes and reactions, often in a time of conflict, you work through the 5 steps. Once you've written and reviewed and you post, you kind of stay engaged in the conversation for a period of time. When you see that the information has been amplified and a good, healthy number of your community members are now aware and it's starting to de-escalate, you will still have some people, based on whatever the nature of the conflict is, that want to continue with the conversation. That's when you start to taper off and understand you're wrapping up to head to that conclusion. So you can use things like using shorter responses. So you've given like the meaty, good, juicy information, the response. Then you can taper down to using things like, thank you so much for that feedback. Please keep it coming. I'm here. I'm still listening. Guys, I'm going to leave for a few hours, but I'm going to check back in on these messages. And then you can move it to likes and reactions so they know that you're still present. Then you can have a concluding statement and say, hey, guys, I think that this has been resolved for the majority of our members. If you're still having a conflict, you can email me here. We're going to move the conversation on to the next topic. It's never going to be clean, cut, and dry. And you're always going to have that one person saying, well, you never responded to me. But you're kind of setting the tone. And so you'll see that the people within your digital space, they will follow suit. And if you see that a lot of people are echoing like, no, you still owe them a response because I'm still curious about this too, then you need to take a step back and say, maybe I need to give more information. But you're always going to have people that want to keep the party going, so to speak. You just have to internally gauge what will be productive, what will be the most productive thing to continue to engage or to conclude the conversation.
That's a great way to look at it. What's the most productive way to approach this? And it goes in hand with Chris's question. Is there any instance where silence would be the best solution? I guess you talked about reacting and giving likes and things like that.
It's a good question, because as a leader, when you draw attention to it, like, you're going to amplify the conversation no matter what. So if you're someone that has a lot of influence in your digital space, you're known as the leader, the expert, the group expert in that space. Once you engage in the conversation, all eyes are on you. So you're going to bring attention to whatever you're talking to. So I find it really important to try to engage as often as possible, especially in the conversations. Just for Zumba, there are some Facebook groups that I'm a part of where they really, there are some conversations I've been tagged in some comments that, like, I mean, just a few weeks ago, the language was very in the tone of, I think that you're just making that answer up. I don't believe you. I think that you're just being lazy. These were some of the words that were being used.
Wow.
Those are the ones I love the most. I feel like that is a chance to really set the tone and show people who I am through how I respond and who I want to be in this beautiful community and what this community feels like, what it should feel like to me. I trying to think of an example of when I've leaned into silence. I think that I have done that in the case where someone is repeating the same comment over and over again. It has been addressed clearly and directly. There has been no change. So there's no need to keep responding. It's been documented. It's in several places. And this often happens with product features. Someone might want something very much, but it's not something through research that you found will impact the rest of the community. So it's not going to change. And you've already been clear and direct about that. So silence sometimes with that. I don't know if that's a great example based on what they were asking.
That's helpful, because I think there's a lot of instances where we'll talk about this very shortly about, people crossing the line with bullying and language and things like that. But if it is a recurring problem regarding product, that's kind of a different situation. But we got a number of questions about boundaries and setting those boundaries. And as you mentioned, even you experienced this within the community. Some members were very inappropriate with their language, and there was recurring bullying. And so at what point should this be escalated? At what point should there be a line, and when should they be blocked? All of those things, I'm wondering if you have had an experience with having to do that, or how you would manage that.
I think it's really interesting to consider, because when I was sharing with the practice exercises, how one of the examples that we provided was an instructor who had held an event and made a donation to a charitable organization that didn't align with one of their students' personal beliefs and value system. And I think as organizations too, that is a challenge. If you're working with a charitable organization on a social justice initiative or, a humanitarian crisis, and you have people in your community that have an opposing view to what your company's position is, that can be very challenging. But I think as a company and as a community, you set the tone. You've been, transparent and vocal about what you stand for and what you believe in. And we love everybody. Everyone is welcome here. But we do have, specifically in a digital community, you have guidelines that that are set for your space. So if anyone is conducting themselves in that space in a way that violates those guidelines, you have grounds to remove them.
Exactly.
The hope is not to. The hope is to come to a general understanding and level of respect, a higher understanding of each other and a level of respect for one another. But if that is not possible, I mean, you have to consider what the business implications will be, of course, right? If you're talking about a brand and not a community that you manage in your personal life, if it's for your professional life. So there are a couple of different factors you have to consider before you would take that extreme step of a measure. And a lot of processes in place, right? We document, we have strategies that we use before we would ever escalate something to that. Even removing comments, anything that is harmful, hate related, that would harm a member of our community, zero tolerance policy for that. But I think it's based on, if you're talking about the organization that you work with, it's based on your pillars and what your North Star is. But yeah, there's a gray area there. But I think there's no gray area that if someone is being harmed, that you take the action that you need to take.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And even to take it to the next level, I mean, abandoning them from the community is one thing, but in terms of terminating their access to the paid subscription to their software, is that ever necessary when someone has crossed those guidelines or crossed the boundaries?
In my community work, that has never been an issue. So things have never escalated to the point where we had someone that we needed to. But through my work with other community professionals, it really happens. That definitely does happen. And oftentimes, depending on who they are, they might come in through a different name and come back into the community a different way. But yes, it does happen. And I think you have to, protect people. Protect people and protect your community that you built and what you stand for. Those are very important things to do.
Absolutely. We have a question from Elisa. If a conflict has just a couple of people complaining or discussing, is there a way to prevent the piling on of more and more people who just want to watch it burn?
Well, I think it's important to, people want to feel seen and they want to feel heard. And that could be a big draw for them for being in the community, is to be able to express themselves and kind of have that camaraderie and do the pile on. So I think that that's a natural behavior sometimes in a community setting based on the person's personality and what they take away, like what is of value to them. So I think one of the big things you can do is, when we talked about when you're working through those 5 steps, when you're assessing the situation, if it's truly urgent in nature or you see the comments growing, people piling on, and it's not really necessary for that to happen, you inserting a placeholder into the conversation of, guys, I see this. Thank you. I appreciate these comments. We're aware of the situation. Sometimes that can slow it, or some kind of general acknowledgement from the person leading the space that, hey, we're aware of it. Thank you, guys. Any tone, the tone that you use, the information that you provide. Let's say that there is an app that's crashing and there's a bug or something, or, something has happened. We're so sorry about this, guys. I know that this is a huge inconvenience. Please know we're working on it. My team is investigating and exploring it. Thank you for your patience while we get it sorted. You guys are the best. Especially in response to the really negative comments, the people who are super frustrated. They cannot do something that they need to do because your product is not functioning for them. They should be mad. And then we as community leaders, we absorb that. And that's what we tell our community leaders that manage spaces, and they're managing their own space. That's why that mental space is so important. You're absorbing all of that. You're on the front line of that. I think that's just part of it. So in response to the question, sometimes just putting a placeholder and a general acknowledgement can help slow it. But also, I think we just have to understand sometimes that people, they should be doing that when they're frustrated. Expression is healthy. And I think that that's where we grow from, is the challenges when things do go wrong. That's how we get better as people and as organizations. So I think it's important to just listen to it, let it ride out, and then also not allowing yourself to be too affected by it. Take action that's going to help the people that are being that have the challenge, but don't absorb it and take it personally, which is hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, that's, fantastic advice. I think, as you said, it's healthy for them to be able to express their concerns and their frustrations, but at the same time, we have the power to control the pace of it and how fast it's going or how slow it goes. So that's really wonderful. Katie's asking, how do you manage set standards for responding or resolving conflict when context always changes? So for example, we have a Discord server, and a 3-strike rule is hard to manage since different rules are more serious to break. But we also want to make sure we aren't implying unfair favoritism if we ban one person but not another.
Yeah, that's very difficult. And I think it's, again, a situation where there's gray area because circumstances are different. And we have communication with the community about it, and almost an open forum. I love transparent discussions. I know you're expressing concern about this, and really, I don't know how much information we're always able to give them to visibility into the issue about why this action was taken with this person and not with this person to protect confidential information. But even having the discussion and engaging with them, if people are expressing the unfairness, that it's not the same way across the board all the time. Just giving them the space to share what they didn't like about it, why they think that is unfair. And then if there's any action that you can take, I mean, because you can only say, thank you so much for this feedback, guys. We'll take it back to the team for their consideration. And then it keeps happening over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, there will come a point where you have to kind of make some kind of statement that alludes to why the decision making is in place. Yeah, that is challenging. I don't think that there's a simple answer for that, Katie. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to keep pondering it and chewing on it and see if I can come up with something better for you.
No, I think because it really depends on the situation and what rules they're breaking, it really is kind of elusive and how you respond to it. And so those are our questions, but we have just a few minutes. If there's just the last few things that you wanted to share with everyone who's tuning in from all around the world, and we all of us as community professionals are dealing with conflict all the time, and you've already said so much, but is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close?
I am just grateful for the time to see all of these community leaders here, to learn from you, even from the comments that you've been sharing with each other. And I want to go back and scroll through because so many of you are connecting with one another. I just thank you for everything that you do. It's hard work. It's beautiful work, but it's hard work. And so having the opportunity to just spend time together talking through just one of the many things that you're tasked with as a community leader is very special. I'm very thankful to CMX for all of the education I've received over the years, and I'm thankful to still be a part of this community. So thank you guys for joining and spending some of your time here with us today. And thank you, SueJean, for bringing us all together.
Amazing. Gina, we're so happy to have you. We're so grateful for you. And for everyone tuning in, thanks so much for being here, for giving us your time to learn and to participate. Once again, this recording will be available most likely tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. And we'll have some more information from this masterclass in the coming days. So thank you once again. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye, Gina. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.